From pitch to politics, Brazil now moves on from hosting the World Cup to hosting the sixth BRICS summit, welcoming leaders from Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Top of the agenda, creating two financial institutions designed to compete with the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Arise News Washington Bureau Chief James Blue is in the nation's capital with more. James, from what I understand, Brazil's president really needs a win here, doesn't she? She had a very rough World Cup, and there's been some talk that she could face some political pressure. So what is she hoping to get out of this?
Well, she's hoping to get both a reserve fund, which would be funded at about $100 billion, and a development bank, which would be funded at about $50 billion. The reality is that these countries are tired of dealing with the World Bank and the IMF because there are lots of restrictions on governance, on transparency, and they would just like to sort of get money and do these development projects without the strings required by the Washington institutions. And the hope is that by creating these two, the bank and the reserve fund, that they will have money to do what they want to do to develop their countries.
Yeah, and they don't want to be told what to do, basically. They want to go it alone. And the question is, do they have the resources and the ability, do you think, to put these banks together?
They certainly have the resources to put the development bank together. Whether they have the resources to create the reserve fund really remains to be seen. If you look at the economy of South Africa, Russia is having trouble with Ukraine. There are a lot of sort of internal pressures which I think will make it much less likely that they will be able to fund the reserve fund to the $100 billion level that they like. They want to get the bank off the ground because they also want to use the bank to provide loans to other parts of the world, which will give them increasing influence. So my sense is that the actual bank has a much better chance of getting off the ground. And that's what people have said that we've spoken to.
Do you think that the World Bank and the IMF, well, they know what's going on, obviously. Is there some competition here? Do you think that they may go back to these countries and say, well, wait a minute, we can maybe change some of our rules?
I don't think you're going to see any rule changes from the World Bank or the IMF. They are very happy to sort of have less a burden in terms of handing money out to countries that need development. There's an African Development Bank, there's an Asian Development Bank, and so all of these additional institutions just support development around the world, and in some ways, you can understand, take pressure off these two institutions here in D.C. So I think they are actually quite happy to take some of the pressure off.
Do you expect that the leaders of these nations are also going to be talking about trade and maybe creating a freer trade zone between the group?
Well, initially, that's what the thought was based on last year's meeting. However, some of the efforts that have happened since then, South Africa is in a real mess economically. The economy is shrinking. And there have been a lot of protectionist efforts sort of within some of the countries in this group. So it's really not quite sure whether they are going to push for freer trade because they're all trying to figure out how to get their goods to the international market in as protected a way as possible.
And finally, everybody wants to be part of a group of letters, if you will. And there's a new one called MINT, Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Turkey, that's now going to compete with BRICS. They're growing faster.
They are growing faster, and there's sort of more opportunity in these sort of MINT countries. Nigeria has overtaken South Africa as the largest economy on the African continent. Turkey is still booming. And, there's a real sense that there are lots of opportunities. And whereas the BRICS were at one time the leading emerging markets, that distinction has moved to other countries at this point.
Okay, James Blue in Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Thank you.